broadcast tonight, South Korean President Park Geun-hye and German Chancellor Angela Merkel meet in Berlin, where the two leaders agreed to work closely to share lessons of German unification. North Korea bashes the South Korean leader, making provocative remarks during her speech at the Nuclear Security Summit, calling her a stooge of the U.S. Seoul's deregulation drive is on full gear as the government will immediately take concrete steps to root out unnecessary red tape. These stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Thursday, March 27th here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hye. We begin this evening in Berlin, where President Park Geun-hye is on a state visit. The Korean leader, who has set unification as the main theme of the four-day stay, secured full support from Germany in charting a course toward a unified Korea and denuclearizing the communist North. Our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun has our top story.
At a joint press conference, Chancellor Merkel said Germany, which has gone through unification itself, is responsible for supporting the two Koreas' will to reunite. And President Park and the German Chancellor agreed to set up a cooperative system to prepare the Korean peninsula for social and economic unity.
독일이 갖고 있는 통일에 대한 어떤 경험, 또 지식 이런 것을 참고로 해서 우리 한반도에서도 평화 통일을 이루기 위해서 어떤 준비를 해야 할까 하는 것을 여러 가지로 구체화해 나가고자 합니다.
When asked about President Park's recent description of reunification on the Korean peninsula as a bonanza, Merkel said Germany's unification was indeed a bonanza. Coming from the communist East herself, Merkel said she witnessed the lives of more than 17 million East Germans change for the better after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
A lot of economic support will be necessary in connection with a reunification. The second thing is that people should be prepared to get to know very different biographies.
President Park also garnered Merkel's support behind her trust-building policies towards North Korea, at the same time urging Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons. On the economic front, the two leaders agreed to expand cooperation between the two sides' small and mid-sized firms in vocational training and science and technology. Earlier in the day, President Park visited the Brandenburg Gate, a landmark in Berlin, symbolic of German unification. Behind me is the Brandenburg Gate, which President Park visited earlier on this Wednesday. She'll continue with her reunification campaign here in Germany this week by meeting with former officials who are at the center of German unification and by laying out her reunification policies during a speech in Dresden. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News, Berlin.
Moving now to some bellicose rhetoric out of North Korea. Now, Pyongyang, displeased with President Park Geun-hye's remarks at the Nuclear Security Summit, lashed out at the South Korean leader. This comes amid worsening inter-Korean relations, which until recent weeks had shown signs of improving. Our Kwon So-ah has this report.
North Korea lobbed direct and coarse words at President Park Geun-hye once again, and with them broke a recent agreement made with South Korea. The spokesperson of the Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the Fatherland, a North Korean organization dealing with reunification matters, told the North's official Korean Central News Agency that President Park's recent emphasis on denuclearizing North Korea was, quote, thoughtless and ignorant, and that she should watch what she says if she really wants to improve inter-Korean relations. The spokesperson also called President Park a, quote, faithful servant and stooge of the United States. The South Korean government says it regrets the disrespectful remarks.
North Korea claims that the South Korean government is slandering North Korea. However, we once again emphasize that this is not true.
The harshly worded comments mentioning President Park by name are the first since Pyongyang agreed to stop cross-border slandering. That came on February 14th at a high-level meeting between the two Koreas. The South Korean government says Pyongyang has violated the deal.
North Korea is lashing out at the emphasis placed on denuclearizing the North at the recent Korea-US-Japan meeting. The criticism against President Park Geun-hye seems to suggest the North wants to lead the nuclear issue by itself.
Despite the harsh words coming from the north and the high chance that more will come, experts say they're not likely to affect the current efforts to improve the relations on the Korean peninsula. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
It seems North Korea could soon face consequences for its latest ballistic missile launches. A UN Security Council meeting is set for Thursday to talk about ways to punish the rogue state, while the U.S. Congress will also consider new sanctions on the North in May. Hwang Ji-hye has more.
The UN Security Council will hold discussions Thursday on ways to punish North Korea for its latest ballistic missile launches. The request for a special meeting came from the United States after Pyongyang test-fired 2 medium-range Nodong ballistic missiles into the EC. On Wednesday, Deputy U.S. State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf said Washington is already in talks with other members of the UN Security Council and its allies and partners to take appropriate measures against the North for its latest provocation.
But those are choices the North Korean government has to make. And we've been clear that the sanctions, the diplomatic isolation, the economic isolation, the political isolation, that will all continue as long as they don't.
She went on to emphasize the U.S. takes Pyongyang's latest military posturing seriously since it clearly violates UN Security Council resolutions banning the nation from any ballistic missile launches. In a related move, U.S. Congress will also consider North Korea sanctions legislation in May. Representative Ed Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, unveiled the schedule as he addressed a congressional hearing on North Korea's human rights abuses. Roy said his committee will do all it can to hold the North Korean leader and his aides responsible for crimes against humanity. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Tension may be brewing on the Korean peninsula, yet more than 30 citizens of the two Koreas are getting together this week in China for the first time in 7 years. They are to jointly deal with the issue of Korean women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese army during World War II. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
In a rare show of cooperation, civic groups from the two Koreas will seek ways to demand Japan issue an official apology for its wartime sexual enslavement of women in the early 20th century. The Seoul-based Korean Council for the Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan said Thursday that it will meet with a North Korean civic group at the end of this month in the Chinese city of Shenyang. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military during the Second World War, and many are still waiting for a heartfelt apology from Japan. The planned conference will be the first time in 8 years for the Koreas to put their heads together on the matter. An official at Seoul's Unification Ministry said the South Korean civic group proposed to counter Japan's ongoing denial of its wartime crimes together, and that the North agreed. 24 South Koreans, including one survivor of Japan's military sexual slavery, will meet 10 North Korean representatives. Meanwhile, a diplomatic source said Wednesday that a Japanese government official met with a human rights activist taking care of the Korean victims for the first time last week in Seoul. The Japanese government initially asked to meet with the comfort women to determine their demands ahead of a government-level meeting between Seoul and Tokyo next month. The Japanese official reportedly said Tokyo wants to resolve the diplomatic feud, stressing Prime Minister Shinzo Abe showed his sincerity about the matter by stating his willingness to uphold Japan's landmark 1993 apology to the comfort women. In response, the South Korean activist urged Japan to acknowledge Tokyo's legal responsibility for forcing the victims into sexual slavery. The activist also said the Japanese leader should apologize to the victims on the international stage. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Seoul and Washington kicked off a large-scale amphibious landing drill on the southeast coast of the peninsula on Thursday as part of the ongoing annual Full Eagle exercise. Dubbed the Double Dragon, the largest landing exercise between the countries in 2 decades, involves 12,500 Korean and U.S. Marines and Navy personnel. Seoul officials say the drill illustrates the rising strategic importance of the Korean peninsula under the Obama administration's Pivot to Asia policy. The exercise will run through April 7th.
for the latest news that impacts Korea and the world. Join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups is part of the government's 3-year economic innovation. Following its official launch on Wednesday, Korea's opposition coalition party hit the ground running this Thursday morning. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy held its first Supreme Council meeting, where it put utmost priority on improving the country's welfare system. Our political correspondent Choi You-sun has more.
화이팅! 화이팅! 지방 선거 승리와 후반 교체 화이팅! 화이팅! 화이팅!
The New Politics Alliance for Democracy party set sail this Thursday with the opening of its first Supreme Council meeting. The new opposition party's co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Chol-soo said their focus is on the people.
Our new alliance top priority will be enhancing the people's livelihoods. Our first lawmaking activities will be devoted to revising 3 existing welfare bills.
The proposed amendments to the 3 bills focus on reaching those most in need of financial help. If the revisions are passed, local governments will be able to assist people who are in need of urgent financial aid, with a particular emphasis on families who are having a hard time paying their water, electricity, and medical bills.
If our first revised welfare bill gets passed, some 1 million desperate families who are in need of financial help will receive it from the government.
The ruling Saenuri party congratulated the newly unified opposition party, but with conditions attached.
We're keeping a close eye on the new party's pledge for strong national security and an innovative and growing economy. We'll have to wait and see how well those pledges are carried out.
Despite the new party's liberal base, it has vowed to adopt what they call conservative values. As for the June 4th local elections, Kim Han-an said that the New Politics Alliance for Democracy will not engage in a nomination process, saying it acts as a breeding ground for bribery and corruption. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government is wasting no time in its push to cut out the red tape it says is slowing down economic growth. Dozens of regulations have been picked out that will either be amended or abolished completely in the coming months. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
The government is speeding up its deregulatory reforms. Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok presided over the first ministerial-level meeting on the matter Thursday to inspect, evaluate, and come up with follow-up measures to President Park Geun-hye's 3-year economic innovation plan. They started with the recommendations proposed during working-level talks held earlier this week and pinpointed 52 regulations that could be improved, including one that would ultimately allow for the operation of food trucks. Hyun said 41 of the regulations can be addressed immediately, with 27 of them to be amended in the first half of this year.
Regulations that could be amended by administrative or in-house measures should be completed and ready to take effect by April. Regulations that require legislative amendments, let's get them done by the end of June.
For the operation of food trucks, the government will allow the remodeling of trucks with a loading capacity of at least 0.5 square meters. The food trucks will be able to do business in amusement and theme parks in the latter half of this year. The ministry says it is working with the Transport Ministry to cut regulations on the tuning of automobiles as well, so long as it does not affect passenger safety. The aim there is to promote the use of vehicles for leisure purposes, such as camping cars and caravans, to boost the country's auto components industry. A task force will also be launched to promote the country's service sector. An estimated 200,000 new jobs will be created through deregulation on the medical and education sectors alone. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And thanks to the deregulation drive, shopping online is about to get easier in Korea. Industry insiders say the government is looking into ways to complement the safety of online shopping and do away with the need for electronic banking certificates so that people won't need to jump through hoops to make purchases. Now, currently, if you want to buy something online that costs more than 300,000 Korean won or about $300, you need a special electronic certificate that's only provided by banks. That makes online shopping difficult for foreigners living in the country and people overseas. Now, the change is expected to take effect in June. And some good news on the auto front. Korean cars accounted for nearly 9% of the auto market in China last year, the highest level ever. But they're aiming to expand their presence there even more, with Hyundai Motor announcing plans to build a fourth factory in China. Our Song Jae-sun reports.
Korea's two largest automakers logged a record 8.8% market share in China last year. That consolidates the Hyundai Kia Automotive Group as the third biggest auto brand in China. It's a significant feat considering the Korean auto group only entered the Chinese market around 10 years ago. Market leaders GM and Volkswagen have been in China for several decades. But the goal is to land a 10% share in the Chinese market, a figure that commonly guarantees stable growth in the auto industry. To that end, Hyundai Motor is building a new factory in China's Midwest. Hyundai Motor and Chongqing, the biggest city in the region, agreed Thursday to build their fourth local factory there. That means additional production of 300,000 cars a year, and with Kia Motors' 3 local factories, their combined production will now exceed 2.3 million cars a year. Even so, the aggressive move was necessary, as China's market leaders, Germany's Volkswagen Group and GM Motors of the US, will both have a production capability of around 4 million units by 2016. After recording over 20 million car sales last year, the Chinese auto market is expected to grow by 15% this year.
China is the biggest and fastest growing auto market in the world, with demand that is expected to reach 35 million cars by 2020. There's no other market of the size and momentum, making it the most attractive and important market for all global automakers.
Korean automakers must also refer research and development on green energy cars so they abide by Beijing's regulations aimed at tackling the country's chronic pollution problem. Song Jae-sun, ARIRANG News.
Let's check on some of the stories making headlines on the global front, from the discovery of more possible debris from the missing Malaysian airliner to the latest report on the rising number of executions in the world. We go live to our Paul Lee at the News Center. Now, Paul, let's start with the new developments in the search for wreckage from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. It appears we are now one step closer to finding out what really happened to the missing plane. What's the latest?
Well, Thai satellite images have found 300 floating objects in the southern Indian Ocean, near the remote area where international contingent of aircraft and ships had been searching for pieces of the Boeing 777. According to the Geoinformatics and Space Technology Development Agency, the objects range from 2 to 15 meters in size and are scattered over an area located about 2,700 kilometers southwest of Australia. If confirmed, it would be the largest potential debris field yet spotted by satellites, supporting earlier French images of a possible crash site. The director of the agency told AFP that the latest information has been given to Malaysian authorities, but several days are still needed to process the data. Aircraft and ships will have to wait on following up on this latest clue, as gale force winds and severe thunderstorms have halted search efforts on wreckage on Thursday. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is widely presumed to have been lost at sea after mysteriously diverting from its course on March 8th with 239 people on board.
Right, and turning to the latest on the crisis in Ukraine, we hear that Kiev is finally getting some good news. We hear the IMF will be lending a helping hand for their struggling economy. What can you tell us?
The International Monetary Fund said Friday that a rescue package between 14 to 18 billion US dollars will be provided, injecting such much needed cash into the Ukrainian economy to avert all-out bankruptcy. The crisis-stricken nation will be agreed to tough reform measures, which experts say will have a big impact on the livelihoods of millions of its citizens. Ukraine's state energy company says heating gas prices would increase by some 50% from May. The IMS Ukrainian mission chief Nikolai Georgiev said the actual size of the so-called standby agreement will be finalized once Kiev's new Western-backed leaders implement the reforms. Some of the measures include ending costly gas subsidies and tackling government corruption and red tape. The United States has also pledged $1 billion in loan guarantees, with another $2.2 billion to come from the European Union.
And ahead of an upcoming presidential election in Egypt, the head of the country's armed forces has announced his bid. Tell us more about who he is.
Sure thing. General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi officially declared his candidacy for president on Wednesday. The army chief who ousted Egypt's first freely elected leader, Mohamed Morsi, is widely expected to win given his popularity and lack of any serious competitors. Al-Sisi made the announcement in a televised address to the nation.
Today, I stand before you in my military uniform for the last time, for I have decided to retire my role as the Army's Chief Field Marshal and as Minister of Defense. I have spent my whole life as a soldier serving this country and serving its hope and aspirations, and so I will continue.
The announcement came hours after Egypt's interim authorities ordered over 900 members of the Muslim Brotherhood to stand trial on charges of murder, inciting violence, and sabotage.
And Paul, before we let you go, fill us in on this new report from Amnesty International. Looks like we are seeing a sharp rise in executions worldwide.
The new report released Thursday shows at least 778 people were executed last year for crimes. That's a jump of about 100 from 2012. It represents an increase of 15% worldwide. However, the organization says the actual number might be higher.
The figure of 778 people executed does not include the thousands believed to be executed in China. Since 2009, Amnesty International has not published figures for the number of people executed in China because we are unable to confirm, because the death penalty is a state secret in China, we are unable to confirm reliable figures.
Amnesty mostly attributes the rise to an increase in executions in countries like Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. Ji-hye?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in about 2 hours' time. It was another warm day here in the capital, and for more, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, what's the latest?
Well, Tia, it really feels like spring with the warm temperatures and the blooming flowers. Today, daytime highs jumped to 22 degrees here in Seoul. Most parts of the country got to enjoy similar conditions, largely due to warm air moving in from the southwest. But just when we thought everything was perfect, fine dust is back. Earlier today, levels soared to 120 micrograms per cubic meter here in Seoul, and now that's down to 99 micrograms. Tomorrow's average daytime highs around the nation will peak from between 21 to 26 degrees, so make the most out of it while you can, as showers are on their way on Saturday. Other than that, Jeju may get less than 5 millimeters of precipitation late tomorrow night. Looking ahead at Friday's readings, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju all reach the mid-20s, while Busan starts off the day at 12 degrees with a high of 19. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju peak at 24 and 21 degrees, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit the mid-teens. That's all the updates for this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.